So Elizabeth, you want to take us?
Oh, yeah, I'll call the meeting to order. And Jeff, the meeting is entirely about you, about your audit,
And
actually.
Charles. Oh, I like
And
Charles's
Charles,
background.
yes.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm glad this is being recorded. I can play it later for my wife to tell me that I'm important somewhere, right? So everyone came together for a meeting about me. Thank you. Yeah, so with me today is Charles Ribley, Senior Manager, that has presented at times to this committee and to the board. And so him and I kind of work hand in hand here to be able to lead the audit services here for the district. So we have the audit report for you. Obviously, we're a few months later than what we normally meet. Normally, it's a cold, rainy night when we always seem to get together there to go through the audit report. So, you know, this year with everything else that went very differently because of COVID and the pandemic and such, the state gave every district a blanket extension to March 31st this year to complete the audit. So as audit committee members, you'll have a chance to have 2 audits done within less than a 12-month period here this year. So we'll be seeing a lot of each other. The audit report was completed on time and filed with the state of California as you would hope it would. And so we have the audit results here that we can share with you today. And I know you all usually have plenty of questions and we're happy to answer those just like we always do with you. So I'll just start with the high level audit results here. If you have the PDF in front of you or on your screen there, you know, we always kind of like to start in the back of the report because everyone goes to the back of the report. In this PDF page 89, if you have it on paper, it's paper page 82, but PDF page 89. So this is the schedule of audit findings and question cost summary of auditors' results. And so this really, again, provides a good high-level overview of how the audit went for the year. Start with your financial statements. The district received an unmodified opinion regarding your financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2020. So again, that's the type of opinion you want on your financial statements, a clean opinion. Your financial statements comply with all the applicable accounting pronouncements and are free of material misstatement. Next is we would comment on internal controls regarding the district's financial operations, and we had no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies to document in the report. So that, again, good news there. You did have a lot of changeovers in some of your control cycles this year of personnel, but at the end of the day, when we test those controls, we found that they were still operating effectively. Next, under federal awards, the district received an unmodified opinion regarding federal compliance. So every year we're required to do a federal audit because you have more than $750,000 in federal expenditures. That number will get even bigger here next year because you'll have all of your CARES related funding, all of that stimulus funds that will be a part of your fiscal 21 audit. That doesn't really hit in fiscal 20 because of how the state treated those dollars before they were forwarded essentially to you. So this year we were required to look at the child nutrition program, and we completed that audit and we had no findings regarding child nutrition. Right below there, you can see we note that you are a low risk auditee in the eyes of the federal government. So again, just good news for you all. That means that you've had several years of no federal compliance findings or financial statement modifications to your opinion. And then lastly is the state awards. And the district this year received an unmodified opinion regarding state compliance. And so that means you've had no state compliance findings for this year. And as you know, from time to time, we've had we've had attendance findings or some of those other kind of more common state compliance areas. And for a unified district such as yourself that have so many of these areas that are applicable to you, to have no compliance findings is obviously good news to bring to this committee and also to be shared with the board as well. So to wrap up my comments, and then I'll open it up to all of you for any questions, is we had no audit adjustments this year as part of completing the audit. So the numbers that were in the unaudited actuals that were approved by the board are the same numbers that are coming back today here with our opinion on them without any modifications. So Other than that, we got through the audit here. We did it all fully remotely this year, which is a first. Obviously, for a lot of our K-12 audits had to be done remotely here as part of the pandemic. And, luckily we have a lot of technology at our disposal. We had many Zoom meetings and Teams calls with district personnel and with others in order to be able to still collect the necessary audit documentation that we needed to be able to complete our audit and to be able to present it to you. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the audit or anything else.
So,
Well, I guess I'll start, Jeff. It's not really a question, but
Okay.
it's just an observation for Pauline and for Liz and for Vivian and all of the staff of the business office. I think it's given all of the difficulties, even during part of this particular year, the idea of being able to close those books and especially not even have any audit adjustments is just exemplary. It's tremendous. And I think Pauline and Liz and your staff are to be really commended for the job that you've done in that way. A little bit, Laura and I were talking about it a little tiny bit, that Lori and Dan and I have been on this committee long enough to know that it's not standard not to have any findings at all and not to have any adjustments. It's, in fact, it used to be, not in recent years, but it used to be really common to have findings, not tremendously significant findings in recent years, but at least when it came to attendance, there were always findings there. So again, even the school sites, I guess, are doing a better job. And I guess, so my question is, long way around, on attendance. I know that you do spot checking, and could you just give us a little bit more insight into the checks that you perform on attendance at the school sites? And I guess maybe this is not a fair question for an auditor, but how confident, we have no findings, how confident are you that our attendance numbers really are as good as they seem to be?
Well,
Or as
I
reliable?
appreciate the maybe letting me out of the second part of that question, but I can definitely answer the first part of your question there. The procedures come very specifically from the state audit guide. And so there's kind of two sets of procedures, if you will. One set is to tie out the records from, the start of where they're initiated, which would be the teacher marking a student present or absent, and how those numbers roll into the site total and into the monthly total, and then into the P1 total or the P2 total or the P annual total at the district level. And so we have to essentially follow that trail, if you will, all the way from start to finish to ensure that they're mathematically accurate and are being accumulated correctly from each site and rolling into the district totals. Then the other part of the procedures is we're required to look at a sample of absences and determine whether those were properly marked as absent in the system. So it's a negative assurance test, if you will, right? That, if you're a parent, you wouldn't write, "Please excuse my son or daughter from school today," if they weren't actually sick and not on campus. So the assumption is, if you have that note or you have a log, something that indicates a student was absent, we should be able to trace that back to the system and see if the student was marked absent. And so, we do that on a sample of school site basis, and then a sample within each school site to complete that testing requirement. One of the reasons you don't have as many attendance errors and findings like you used to is the automation of the attendance process, really, right? And so in the old days, my dad was a teacher for 40 years. You had to fill out a Scantron or bubble in a Scantron
Oh.
for each period, and then you had to turn it in, and it had to be scanned in correctly at the site office. And every time I give this example, my band director pops up in my head, because my band director never took attendance. And then the school office would call and say, "Hey, Mr. Nunes, you need to turn in all your Scantrons." So he would turn in all of his Scantrons, but he never took attendance. So everybody got marked present for 0 and first period because he never took attendance. Well, think about how many errors he created in the system, because that if a student is present for 1 minute on campus, they're counted as present. And now the auditor is there with the note saying that I wasn't there that day. But yet Mr. Nunes marked me present for that day. So he creates all kinds of errors essentially in the attendance system. And with the automation of the whole process, where everything is really done electronically at this point, it's really streamlined a lot of that process to prevent those kind of human errors from occurring in the attendance system.
I was actually curious on that subject. How did it work this year when we were held harmless? Did we actually have to take attendance for the Zoom?
Correct. So essentially the state said the P2 date was the end of February, and no attendance was really required to be tracked or recorded after the end of February.
Okay.
For that fiscal year. And now the rule, and then there's different rules for fiscal and attendance year 21 here, where you're now under doing distance learning, and you have to have your weekly engagement records and your daily participation logs to track attendance for fiscal 21.
Oh, okay. So from February to June, essentially, everybody was present. So,
Like you said, it was basically a hold harmless at that point. They stopped tracking attendance. The state stopped tracking attendance effective at the end of February.
did we then get ADA for everybody, or how did that work?
Well, so I mean, Pauline, maybe you know when your P2 date would normally be. Normally it's kind of mid-March to the end of March is typically when P2 would be. So, and again, remember, everyone's assumed it's a fractional calculation, right? So assuming we did the whole school year and a kid went to school for the entire year, it'd be 180 days divided by 180 days equals 1 ADA. And so if they were gone for 1 day, it's 179 over 180. So the numerator and the denominator are going to go down by the same amount when they cut it off at the end of February, essentially.
Oh, I see. And then beginning last September, there was a different system.
Right. So when everyone basically went back to school for fiscal or for school year 21, everyone essentially is operating under a distance learning. And I don't have any clients, at least, that went back full time to the classroom where you were either present or absent if you were in the classroom. So if you did any form of distance learning, whether it was fully remote or somewhat on campus, somewhat not hybrid, there is a different method of taking attendance for fiscal year 21, because essentially there's no such thing as ADA actually in fiscal year 21, because this year your funding is not going to be based off of what happened in this school year, because they just knew everything was going to be so different.
Oh, what is it? Do you know what it's going to be based on, or is that Pauline? The question I should ask Pauline.
I'm going to let Pauline take that one, but it should be based off of your fiscal year 20 ADA.
Yeah, so we're using the ADA. The ADA carries over, right? From 20 to 21. And then in 21, 22, we're going to be doing this hybrid method. So I think when we attended the round table, there was a lot of discussion on how we're going to be tracking. And I'm going to make sure I share with the Ed Services team to make sure they're also up to date on that.
So Pauline, you made that clear in the Budget Advisory Committee. I don't know if it was clear in this committee about the potential for a cliff and whether or not that cliff will eventuate or not, but certainly the potential exists.
Right. So we talked about the 7% reduction. We're expecting a 7% reduction, but we're funded in our LCFF, just the way the formula works, or well, the way ADA works. We're funded on the higher of the current or the prior year. So in 21, 22, we're actually going to be using 1920s ADA because of the whole harmless in 2021. And then in 22, 23, we're thinking that we're going to recognize the real decrease in enrollment and ADA. And we'll have a better idea, obviously, then in terms of what does this cliff actually look like? Do we think we're going to regain some of the students we lost? We're still using the 7% until May 15th, which is May 16th when they're doing another count. So we'll see how close we get to pre-pandemic levels. But we're thinking it's going to be anywhere from 7 to 4% at this point. But when we get the May revise, when we get the information for the May revise, as well as the revised projections for enrollment, we'll adjust our budget accordingly. Does that answer your question, Elizabeth?
Oh, yes, yes,
Okay.
but the final number will be the October number, won't it? When you get to
Well, this is for 22, for 2021, if it comes in higher, we can use that number, but if it comes in lower, we can use the year before.
Okay.
And we don't anticipate it's going to come in higher.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I don't have any specific questions on the material. I do have a question just in terms of the process. I mean, what were the challenges given COVID, given not being able to actually go to the site? And how does that affect the quality, let's just say the quality of the audit?
I think it's a great question. I'll tell you, if we rewind, I mean, it's hard to think that far back, but you think about when the pandemic happened. It was basically mid-March, right? Was when everything kind of really came to a stop. And 2 weeks later, we were supposed to start our normal come out and visit you for the first time visit that we would normally do in April. And at that time, you know, there were a lot of folks, and especially in the Bay Area, where things were kind of fully shut down, and it was just, we'll put it on hold for right now. And so, you know, a lot of our procedures that we would normally do in April, we were getting done now in June and July. And, you know, a lot of the year-end items that normally we would do in September had pushed out to December and January. I think one of the things that we've always had, or at least for several years, is technology. And auditing has always been very old school in the sense that our clients expected us to be at the conference table in their office, being able to pull paper out of drawers and stuff to be able to see support. And the reality is that isn't the reality. That isn't really what auditing is anymore, or needs to be, really. You know, the last couple of years, we've been able to, through our request process, to be able to ask for things electronically. The district's been able to provide those, but we still were sitting on site with you. And half the time I find my teams communicating so electronically rather than walking down the hallway to ask Pauline or her team a question, they'll send the email instead. So the only thing that was different was we weren't sitting there doing that. We were sitting at our homes doing that. I think the level of work that was completed is the exact same. If anything, it's probably a little more stringent, because as we challenge ourselves on what are the risks in an audit, we had to talk about were there changes in who we were dealing with on the management side of things. What challenges are they facing in their life that could affect how they're doing their jobs, or how they're completing their tasks. And so we had to adopt some changes to our audit procedures to be able to, I think, mitigate those risks that come up as part of an audit. So at the end of the day, I think the audit quality is just as good as it's always been, if not maybe even a little bit better, because we had to think differently for once. You know, a lot of times you can kind of just get in a cycle of doing an audit over and over again, and having to actually step back and go, well, things are different now. And so what do we need to do differently to be able to answer to those challenges?
In talking to your colleagues, are you finding that other districts have been less perfect than Berkeley appears to have been?
Of course. Dan,
There are, you know, it's interesting because there are clients that had difficulties in years that weren't difficult, right? And so it only exacerbated maybe some of their challenges when they now had that placed on top of them too. And then also just the distractions of whether it's helping get kids back on campus or figuring out how they're going to spend this new pot of money that just came in and we've only got a month to spend it. And now we've got to move on to a new pot of money that the state has changed the rules on and the feds have changed the rules on. And so, you know, there's a lot of moving pieces that are happening all over the place. And so that does present an opportunity for some mistakes to happen. And yes, we did see that at a few other districts, and we didn't have that issue here at Berkeley.
Great. I mean,
I
great.
think Dan, from the staff's point of view, the approving documents, you know, everything was done online. So if someone didn't have the ability to go in and sign a document on their iPad, you know, they didn't have the technology to do that, there were a lot of emails that were attached to documents. So we had a lot more communication back and forth because every document either had to have like a physical signature on it or an attached email. So so our accounts payable team, I think it was a lot harder on them. And then of course we had documents that were copies. We didn't have original documents because they were all scanned and approved, but we made sure we had the approval. So there was a lot more due diligence on our part to make sure that the approval process still worked.
Mhm.
So, did you have anything else to add, Liz, or?
Sorry. I think that's true. And the other thing was that staff spent quite a bit of time in the office. I mean, it was only a few months where we were working remotely, and recognizing that so much of what we do is going on every day and really needs attention. We had people in here getting those things done to make sure that they were done on a timely basis.
Mhm.
So it was sort of some things you can do remotely, but paying bills, you can only do so much remotely. So for example, so I think it probably helped that we had a core staff here to make sure that things got done on a timely basis.
Yeah, I had a question about materiality, the materiality threshold. I noticed you talked about it for nutrition services, but I wasn't sure how that related to your work in other areas of the financial statements. And also wanted to know, were there any process improvement recommendations that you all normally make, or is that kind of not a part of this audit process?
Well, so the federal threshold that I mentioned there, $750,000. I mean, that's a federal guideline that's put out there as far as whether it's a major program or not, and whether it has to be audited. From a state compliance perspective, there's actually no materiality. So any finding that we have has to be reported regardless of how small it is. And the district has seen that in the past for even one excuse note that's documented incorrectly has to be documented in the audit report, and it's a modification to the opinion. As far as a financial statement opinion goes, we do have a materiality that's set for each opinion unit. So it would be on the governmental activities for each major fund and the aggregate remaining fund information. And you know, so that's set off of qualitative and quantitative factors. And it's a number we don't share outside of our audit team, essentially, because, you know, if we were to talk about materiality, then, you know, the potential is that management could then, let's say I said, hey, materiality is $1 million. Then they know that I'm not going to look at anything that's $900,000, and guess, you know, that causes other sorts of problems, if you will.
And what about the process improvement recommendations?
So if, you know, our general policy is as a firm, and other firms may have different approach to it, is if we have something we need to communicate to the board or to management, essentially, that would be some sort of internal control recommendation, we would actually put it in the audit report. So we don't have any comments this year. So there's not something that you haven't seen that we've sat down with Pauline and said, you should really do this differently, let's say. As a standard, we're required to disclose anything that's a significant deficiency or material weakness in internal control. That's required by standard, but we typically have put any recommendations that we have in the financial statements. And an example of that is in prior years when we've had a few comments, let's say on like associated student body. I mean, that's typically not a significant deficiency or material weakness, but we would still bring it. We have still typically included that in the report.
So can we just take a practical example?
Sure.
For example, we have several procedures where things have to be approved by different people and various signatures at different levels. So it could be one purchase order that requires 5 to 6 signatures. Would that be a change that would trigger something as a deficiency for you all? Or if we were to go back and reduce have you ever, recommended to BUSD that they simplify some of these approval needs?
That's a good question. I think our recommendations would be more the other direction. If we saw that there was only one sign off, let's say on a purchase order, and there should be, and that doesn't make sense when you look at the greater realm of the internal control regarding the purchasing process, then we would recommend that you do something in addition, or you do something different in order to make that a more secure process. I don't know that we spend as much time going, man, you guys really beat the heck out of this process and you could do this so much faster if you only had 3 people do it instead of 10.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yep.
That's all for me.
Jeff, I had a question. So the district over the last couple of years has had some difficulties when it comes to payroll processing, and especially in terms of staffing some of the upper management positions. And I know Pauline is working very diligently to try to rectify some of those issues. How, as far as your auditing process is concerned, could you speak to us a little bit about what you do with respect to payroll and ascertaining that we don't have any big mess ups going on when it comes to our payroll processing?
Sure. Well, payroll is definitely a very significant process. I mean, at most districts, that's 70 to 80% of your expenditures in a year is coming through payroll and benefits. So we spend an extensive amount of time actually documenting internal controls. So essentially sitting down from start to finish of hiring someone and what that process is like to have them set up, from a step and column perspective, to make sure that that's all been done correctly in the system, all the way to the final sign off of the payroll register at the end of the payroll process. So whether that's at the monthly or semi-monthly basis. That's kind of the beginning of the process. And then once we have done that, we'll actually say, okay, well, what are the key controls that are in this process? What are those key stop gaps that we have along the way in payroll? And we'll actually take a sample of personnel at that point and actually test those controls to see if we see the sign off. So you said that you do this. Let's see that whether that is happening in the system or not. And so that's something we do annually as part of your audit is testing controls over the payroll process. And payroll really gets in a hit twice, if you will, because a lot of your federal expenditures typically relate to payroll related expenditures too. So we're pulling a lot of payroll transactions just between those two parts of the audit.
Okay, well, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Can I ask one follow-up question to that? Is timeliness a factor that you consider, like how efficient this process was completed from the start of hire?
So I guess my mind was going to a different place. So if the payroll review, if the payroll reconciliation or review was done 3 months after the payroll was run, that's not a good control, right? Because essentially someone's already been paid. They've probably been paid. If something was wrong, it's over and done with, and those people might have got the money that they shouldn't have gotten or whatnot in the system. You want those controls to be very timely. I wouldn't say that our audit process spends time to determine whether the timeliness of maybe when someone was input into the system or was hired timely, like to fill a position, something like that.
Yes.
Ours is more looking at, okay, you said you were going to hire them at $20 an hour. Are they getting paid $20 an hour? Are they getting paid $120 an hour because somebody keyed in a 1 accidentally in front of the 2, and now they're getting paid $120 an hour when they shouldn't have been?
But what if someone was hired, say March, and their benefits were supposed to start April 1st, but then we found the benefits or whatever didn't actually start until June or something because of some paper wasn't completed or, in the process? How does that turn up in your internal control testing?
Well, I mean, that's one of those where the employee would complain, right? And so if you didn't get paid for 2 months or you didn't get your benefits for 2 months, the risk there is going, to me, the other direction, where you're going to have someone that's going to speak up and say, hey, I should be getting paid and I'm not getting paid. So to me, that's getting caught through that way, right, versus someone that's being paid too much, let's say, and are they going to say something or not because they're getting paid too much? And so again, that's just kind of the way an audit would look at internal controls.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question for you. I know that what you're looking at is to see to what extent the books are fairly stated, and you're offering an opinion saying that the books are fairly stated. And it has nothing to do with whether their books are in, from a financial point of view, are great or terrible. It's just that they tell you where they are. In looking at the audit, was there anything that jumped out at you or that raised concern to you about the state of Berkeley's finances?
Well, that can be kind of a loaded question, right? I mean, so part of what we have to do as auditors, let's put it this way, at a minimum, what we need to do, and it became more prevalent this year, just with the strains that the pandemic has put on everyone, is what's the financial viability of the district 12 months out. So we're required from the date of our opinion to be able to look out 12 months and say, are you financially viable or not? And we actually work with a few districts that are close to the brink, if you will, right? That they may not make it, let's say right now, 3 years out. And so we then have to spend an extensive amount of time actually walking back management's assumptions and plans to determine whether they're financially viable or not. To me, one of the things that you can look at in the report is the schedule of trends and analysis there, where you look at, it documents the percentage of available reserves for the district. And as you look at yours, your numbers, it was 3.6% here as of 2020. And this is on PDF page 77 or audit page or paper page 71, if you have it in front of you. And while that number hasn't changed dramatically year over year, as far as, you're at 4.6, 3.5, and 3.6 over the last 3 years, and 4% is budgeted for 2021, that doesn't say that that's a large amount of reserve, right? But it also doesn't say that you're financially unhealthy either, or there is a risk that you may be a going concern. If that was the case, then we would have to add additional disclosure to call that attention to any reader or anyone relying on these financial statements.
Okay, great, thanks.
So how far out do you go with the viability estimate? Just 1 year?
Right, so we're required, so the district, as part of your first interim and second interim, have to provide a certification that looks out at, if I remember correctly, it's 3 years.
3 years.
We're, as auditors, required to look out 12 months from the date of our opinion.
Oh, okay, so you don't look at the 3 year?
No.
Okay.
And Jeff, following up a little bit on Laura's question, is it true that, and I don't have anything in particular in mind, but is it true that if this audit committee were to identify an area that we felt you as auditors, when you come in next time, should pay particular attention to, or be an additional focus, then after we've talked about it, we could, is this right, let you know, and you'd probably look at it more carefully.
Correct. So we're always open to have a discussion with this committee about anything that troubles you or you have concerns about that you want us as auditors to be aware of. Depending on what that concern is, there's several different outcomes, right? I mean, some of it could be that it's something simple that we can add to part of our audit process. It may be something that we go, this is really outside the scope of an audit, but I understand that it's of concern to you. And so we can do this work and it's outside the scope, and we'd have to, talk about what sort of engagement that is, let's say. I think it's probably somewhere in between that, right? So yes, if there's something that is of concern to you, then we certainly would want to know about that and be able to address that in our audit plan.
Okay. Thank you. I did have one last question. When it comes to all the new funding, supplemental funding, whether it's from the state of California or the federal government with respect to coronavirus, how is that, just in a general sort of way, how is that going to be accounted for in the next few years? Are we going to have separate funds for it? What's it going to look like? Is it part of the general fund? Where is it all going to appear?
Well, Pauline, you come up behind me and correct me here if I say something wrong, but I would say that the bulk of the money will run through your general fund. From a compliance perspective, the federal dollars will probably be at a dollar amount that will require us to test that, like we did National School Lunch this year. I would highly suspect that next year, one of our programs that we were reporting back to at the end of the 21 audit is that we audited, ESSER or one of these other CARES related type funding programs. Outside of that, like the state dollars, it would just be auditing that the expenditures were valid expenditures and that you have accounted for just like any other dollars that the district receives from the state for other funding purposes. But largely, all that will run through the general fund.
And are you going to be working, or have you already been working with Pauline and other business offices in how to appropriately, create our own internal financial statements and not audited, but unaudited actuals and things like that? Kind of helping out on how to do this properly?
Well, I can tell you one of the things that Crow did as a response to the pandemic and as a response to a lot of everything being kind of turned on its head as far as the way that we normally did things, was we started having monthly roundtables where we invited all of our CBO clients, or all of our clients, their CBOs or anyone from their accounting department that wants to come. And we share information that we get from the federal government and from the state government and anywhere else, basically, so that we can distribute it to everyone. And we actually have a portion of the meeting that's just open dialogue amongst different districts. So to be able to say, some of the best information comes from, well, this is what we're planning on doing. What are you planning on doing? And the auditors just kind of sit on the sideline and learn like the rest of us as to, how things are being done in real time, basically. And so for the last year now, we've been doing these roundtables, and your district's participating in it. And we typically have about 50 people in these meetings to talk about what's the latest and greatest. And we're fortunate as a national firm to be able to have folks like some of my other fellow partners that sit on committees at a national level to be able to get information straight from those that are talking to the federal standard setters on these programs and a lot of times we're able to get advanced copies of compliance requirements and stuff like that. And we certainly distribute that all to our clients as soon as we get it. So, and, you know, I think I've told you before, I sit on the audit guide task force at the state level. And so again, with the audit procedures that we have this year for fiscal 21, we've been sharing these for months with our clients in order to make sure that we don't want you to have compliance findings. And the way we can do that is to help disseminate this information as quickly as possible.
Right, good. Thank you very much.
One other question regarding if we were to upgrade our systems or not. What role should we have our auditors play in that? And you know, what part of the onboarding process should you be in that transitional plan as well?
Well, I guess it depends on what systems you're referring to.
Our
Are you
financial-
talking about the financial accounting system?
Yes. Isn't that what we're talking about,
Mhm.
Pauline?
I
Yeah,
know there's been some discussions. I think I was heard about that a little bit a while back. Yeah,
yeah.
Liz and I talked about it. Do you want
Yeah,
me to
so-
speak to that, Jeff?
Sure, Charles. I haven't let you talk at all. It's your turn.
I'm just sitting here listening. It's fine. So, you know, from an auditing perspective, we're required to gain an understanding of the internal control process that was followed by the district to properly transition financial data over from your old accounting system to the new system, including making sure that you know, there was a review process in place to, you know, say if you had a changing over of your accounting structure to some degree within the limitations of what the state allows, if there was a review of what was done at the detailed level with your vendors to make sure that that data was transitioned over, but also, okay, well, is somebody at the district level reviewing that, and is that process sufficient? So we would be, and in the cases, it depends on, in some cases, it depends on the complexity, but we can engage our specific IT auditors to, as applicable, to help us with the kind of more technical side if there's something that was a little bit more complex, to where, say, somebody like ourselves that wasn't versed in the coding side of the accounting transition, we can involve them to understand that process as well, to make sure that it happened correctly. So our responsibility is to be involved with the transition of the data to make sure it's correct. And so, because ultimately we're going to opine again on whether the financial statements are fairly stated. So if we don't have confidence that the data that you are using for your reporting is solid, then we can't rely on that and say that it's fairly stated. So we have to be involved in that process. Now, when it comes to the implementation, there's limitations on what we can do, you know, from an involvement, so that we don't give the appearance of acting as management, right? So we have to stay separate from that process of working directly with vendors and that process. So.
And what about the changes in the internal control structure? You know, as you update and automate, generally that means your internal control process around certain functions will also change, hopefully to be enhanced, but also reduced from the minutia of our current paperwork processing.
Yeah, so every individual financial audit, you know, from one fiscal year to the next, needs to stand on its own. So we have to reassess internal controls of those key accounting cycles every year, you know, no matter what. And so we would do that, you know, kind of, we would have asked for your process, a narrative, if you will, of, you know, what do you do to transact cash disbursements? What do you do to transact, you know, payments for bond expenditures? What do you do for payroll and bank and other account reconciliations? So we re-ask that question every year regardless. And so there would be a little bit more process involved in the transition of an accounting system, because we would then have fully new narratives perhaps to read through and understand, and then evaluate and potentially test the controls over.
Yes, understood. My question is, do you have a roadmap for your bare minimum thresholds of of approvals, of, what the process should look like, your segregation of duties. Like, what are the things that you all recommend as we move forward into this, so that we're not getting a comment after the fact, so that we can actually be proactive. And I'm sure we know all of this around, proper segregation of duties and this, that, and the other, but it would be nice if there was like, what is your bare minimum standard that you all approve and that you would think creates a weakness?
I don't know, Jeff, do you want to speak to kind of, we don't really use checklists. We use kind of an understanding of what your process is. And that's part of the reason we do our preliminary work as of an interim date, so that we can kind of get in front of that process and develop it, understand it as it's being, developed, and before that year-end phase hits, so that if there is a challenge from an internal control, so if there's something we need to make sure is improved, we can do it earlier on in the phase, in the process, and not have that be a finding. Yeah. Is that, I know
Great,
there's.
that's very helpful.
Sure. Any other questions that we could answer?
So if there are no other questions, we are taking this to the board on Wednesday. I think we've been given 5 minutes. Not a lot of time, but Izzy or Elizabeth, do you have like notes that you want to address the board and the public? And then Charles, are you gonna be available, or is it gonna be Jeff for the meeting?
I think I made myself available, Jeff. I don't know if you had it on your calendar as well by chance, but I think I'm already booked for it.
That would be
Okay.
helpful if you could do that, Charles.
I'll definitely be there.
Very funny, Laura. Laura is a board member, in case you didn't figure that out.
Yeah.
But 5 minutes is not a lot. So they have a lot of presentations. So do we want, Izzy, do you want to kind of say something? And Elizabeth, and then Charles, all in 5 minutes.
Is it 5 minutes for all of it? Maybe we should just,
Total.
what do you think, Izzy? Do you think we should just give that to
Yeah, I mean,
Jeff
I guess,
and
well,
Charles?
what one is, I personally am not available on Wednesday. I'm gonna,
Oh.
my wife and I are going out of town starting then. But I don't know what you think, Lori. I mean, we have done this in years past. There's no question, when we've been able to go in person.
Yeah, we've had our own 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this time around, I guess I sort of feel two things. One is that it's sort of old news. This goes back so far that there isn't, really anything, new about it. The other part is, and this is a good thing, there aren't any findings. In years past, we've been able to highlight, a few of the things, whether it's attendance or
ASB.
ASB that have been issues. This time there aren't any. I mean, in some respects, that's a good thing, to kind of let the public know that, Berkeley's done, a very good job with its financial statements. So what do you think? Are you able to spend 30 seconds on that, Lori?
I could do a little 30-second intro, although I think probably, is it Jeff or Charles who will be presenting?
It'll be me.
You'll probably incorporate something like that, or would you rather?
I mean, I'm very familiar with and comfortable just kind of introducing myself and speaking through the summary level results. If you want to handle it that way. But if you want to have that kind of intro, I'm perfectly fine with that as well. So I can keep the presentation brief without a challenge. That shouldn't be a problem for me.
I mean, in prior years, we've sort of stolen Jeff's thunder often, and the other auditors have come in and, Lori and I have sort of summarized the audit, and then poor Jeff has to come in 3 hours later and say, well, it's all been said already. Laura, oftentimes the board members have had some opinions one way or another, whether you think kind of from the public standpoint, really, and maybe the other board members who aren't on this committee, do you think it would be helpful if Lori were able to, chime in for 30 seconds, or is it not really necessary?
For the board, it's probably not necessary, but as a someone who's observed longer than I've actually been on the board, I always got that extra comfort from seeing the audit committee kind of join in with the agreement.
So I think Lori would comment. I mean, Lori, now I'm getting on. So well, yeah, Lori, why does it say Elizabeth? But anyway, so Lori would comment during committee comments, and then there's a separate discussion item for the auditors. So we could do
Okay,
both.
so I do what used to be filling out the card,
Yes.
whatever the new equivalent
Yeah.
is. Okay. So
Yeah, so then you get 5 minutes for that piece on your own, and then they could have the whole 5 minutes for their presentation. Or were you saying you were saying the presentation is 5 minutes, right, Pauline?
Mhm, yeah.
So now we get 10 minutes. We just found 10 minutes.
probably won't use it up.
So Lori, you're okay with what you're gonna say then? Or did you need a little cheat sheet, or what do you need to?
I think I'll probably, unless there's some other comment, I think I'll just summarize
Okay.
what we've said here.
Okay. Okay. So do we want to set the next, I've put a link to our COVID-19 tool in our chat, and that has all the funding, all the expiration dates, all the source, all the uses, and then further down, like I think it's row 29, we've said how much we've spent and how much we have left. So it's a useful tool, and we're gonna present it to SBAC, and I think we're presenting it to the board as well.
Okay.
So you can take a look at that.
Elizabeth, now I'm calling you Elizabeth.
I know, Lori, and I was calling Elizabeth because what's on the sheet, and we have another Liz. So
in your comments, can you just kind of highlight what Izzy said earlier about the incredibleness of this work not in lieu of, but in addition to managing COVID?
You mean Izzy's introductory complimentary?
yeah. Thank you, Izzy. Thank you, by the way. Much appreciated.
Yeah, to our staff, because that really needs to be highlighted to the board and the community, the significance of that.
The main message.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Did we want to, well, we can excuse Jeff and Charles if you just want to set up the next meeting. So thanks, Jeff. Good to see you always. And Charles, I'll see you on Wednesday.
All
And
right.
always good to see you as well.
Thanks,
Likewise.
everybody.
All right. See
Thank
you
you.
guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye. Mhm.
Bye.
So let me get Vivian and let's see. Vivian, are you there? Oh, she's there.
Yes, I'm here.
Do we want to set the, do we have a time for the next, when do we want to meet? I guess it's going to be for budget adoption is the next major thing we have coming up.
So that would be in June, right?
Yeah.
So on the calendar, that would be, there's 3 board meetings, June 2nd, 9th, and 23rd.
Oh, so we would want to have and I think ours is due on the 9th, the first reading.
Yeah.
So we would want to have the
June 7th.
June 7th would work, yeah.
Does that agree with everyone's schedule? June 7th?
Sure.
Get a thumbs up from Dan.
Yeah.
What
Can we
about
have
you,
another
Lizzie?
day meeting? Can we meet during the day again like this, 2:30 to 4?
Yeah, is that okay with everybody? How?
Is that okay
How's that
with
work?
Dan? Because Dan was teaching at that time.
Oh, I'm not teaching in June. I'm not teaching in June.
Oh, okay.
Okay, is it?
Later is better
with
for
me.
me, but not like super late, but like 3:30 if that's not too late.
3:30 to 5?
That's much better for me.
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Okay. Liz?
With you, Lori.
Yes, it's fine.
Yeah, 3:30.
And we have to see if it works for Khadijah because she's on the committee as well.
30 to 5. I'm sorry, what was the event? It's the what is the event? The budget
Yeah,
adoption?
the first reading of the budget on the that will be the focus.
122. Okay. All righty. I'll send
All
them in.
right. Okay.
Dan, which email do you prefer I should use? The Berkeley one or the?
I prefer the Berkeley one because then it goes to the right calendar.
Okay, I'll use that one.
Okay, guys, so we're off. Thanks for attending the meeting and thanks for your input as always.
Well,
Thank you.
congratulations.
Okay, thank you.
And I
Congratulations.
get to see you
Yeah.
tomorrow. SBAC.
Is that-
Laura, you're gonna be there, SBAC?
Maybe I can pop in. I hope to.
Okay,
But,
all right.
thanks for your good and congratulations. Woohoo.
Thank you. Woo! One thing's working. Okay, guys. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.